Welcome, thank you for attending. We're standing between you and beer, and we're fully conscious of that, so we will end on time. Just to introduce ourselves, my name's Leon Tribe, this is Doug Daly, and if you want any of our details, you can reach us there. So we've got the Twitter handles at the top, our blogs, and then I've written a bit.ly because LinkedIn is useless for providing reasonable links. And yeah, so if you need to reach us for any reason, there it is. So today we're going to be talking about how small businesses, enterprise businesses can use Dynamics 365, but more importantly, how they can use it without any development or with very little development. And so to do that, we're using a hypothetical company, and thus the drinkies, of Daily Drafts. Now, Daily Drafts in our hypothetical situation is a microbrewery. They supply to pubs in their local area, and they also like to get feedback from the pub clients. And we'll explain how they do that in a little bit. Because they're smart, they're using Microsoft products. And they've also extended out the technology through the supply chain. So at the pub, and one of their pubs is called LogMeIn, not to be confused with a software product. The LogMeIn has their kegs on a Wayscale. That communicates through to the Raspberry Pi, which communicates to Azure, and then they get the full suite, right? So once it's got through to Daily Drafts Azure, then they get the full suite of products available to them. So they get the whole Dynamics 365 products, such as the old CRM and the ERP suite, which are now a bunch of app services. And they've also got the stuff that adds on top of that, so things like your Power BI, things like your Logic apps, your Flow, and all those wonderful extra tools that are now available to us as part of the Dynamics 365 stack. They've also gone into the App Store, and they've got themselves a portal, so they're using CRM portals on top. And so they've brought all that technology together, and we'll show you exactly how they've done that today. Who is familiar with Dynamics 365? Okay, so about half the room. Okay, so under our contractual obligation to Microsoft, we do have a couple of slides on Dynamics 365, which we'll now quickly go through before showing you the demo. So what Dynamics 365 is, it used to be there was sort of two areas of product in the Dynamics suite, which was the CRM product, which was a product built from the ground up, which did things like sales pipeline management, marketing management, things like that. And then they had the ERPs that they had acquired. Now, there used to be quite a few of them. These days, it's essentially a two-horse race. There's Navision, NAV, and there's Exapta, or otherwise now known as AX.
Well, now known as Operations.
Now known as Operations. Well, that's right, because all these products, of course, aren't called Dynamics CRM or Dynamics AX anymore. They've all been brought into this Dynamics 365. And so, yeah, what Microsoft realized was rather than having these sort of siloed products which interact with the clients, it'd be much better to bring it all together and offer it as a suite of services. And so that's what Microsoft Dynamics 365 is. They've basically taken those products, merged them together on the back end, and now provide a range of services. So in the case of CRM used to have a sales module, a marketing module, support module. That's been sort of broadly broken out into the sales service, the customer service, and the marketing service. And they've added a few other bits on, as you can see there. From the ERP side, we've got the operations. Excuse me, and then in the larger one, we've got the financial services as well, don't we, in the larger offering. So that is what Dynamics 365 is. Basically, they've put a rebadging on the CRM and ERP offerings of the past. Now, on top of that, they've also put a range of other stuff. So we've got the AppSource library, which Doug will talk about in a sec. We've got the underlying services platform, the Common Data Services platform. That gives us things like Power Apps, gives us Flow, which is an integration tool, and gives us Logic Apps, which is basically a big brother of Flow. It allows you to pass data back and forth. You'll be seeing that today. And then you've also got deep integration to Office 365. So as well as providing a tool for business, it's linking into that productivity suite that is Office 365. And similarly, we've got the IoT, so we can bring in data. We've got Cortana Intelligence, which does things like sentiment analysis, which again, our plan is to show all of this in the next hour. So we'll do as best as we can, because we're not going to keep you between you and beer. And we also got things like the Power BI, which is the business intelligence suite.
And so what you're going to see today is basically a whole lot of predefined config to suit the scenario of a microbrewery, or as close as my home brewing experience gets to a microbrewery anyway. And the whole idea of that is that now that we have a unified app store in the form of AppSource within Microsoft. Organizations like yourselves as potentially partners in the Microsoft ecosystem can build content that then becomes available as a raft of pre-packaged elements that form a set of business processes that people can buy through an app store. And so it starts to break the traditional technology boundaries that we spoke about, like CRM and AX, and it starts to be the ability to kind of procure business processes in the cloud. Okay.
So the first scenario we're going to talk about, so how we're going to do this, we'll talk about Daily Draft's B2C operations or B2C sample process. We'll talk about a B2B sample process, and then we'll look behind the covers and show you how we've done it through mostly config. There are a couple of areas where you need a little bit of script, and we'll point those out as well. So in the first scenario, which is your B2C, Daily Drafts wants to get close to their customers. They love their customers. They love their beer drinking customers. Any whiskey drinkers in the house? Any Islay single malt whiskey drinkers in the house, like Laphroaig? Anyone a friend of Laphroaig? If you're a friend of Laphroaig, which I am, they do a really good job of getting close to their customers, even though they might not sell directly to their customers. And they do that. Every time you buy a bottle of Laphroaig, you're entitled to a square foot peat of land at their distillery. And so you basically sign on the internet, you say yes, and they say, yep, you've now got your plot of land. If you go to the distillery, they'll give you a dram of Laphroaig whiskey, and they will take you to your plot of square foot of peat. It's fantastic. They've got a whole experience set up. Daily Drafts probably isn't to that level, but they want to get really close to their customers. So the customers are in the pubs. They're drinking their beer, and what Daily Drafts does is when they supply a keg to the pub, they give them beer coasters. They supply the pub beer coasters as well, and these beer coasters have got a QR code on them. And so we got our beer drinker who's drinking his beer, probably in a glass different to this. And when he's halfway through and feeling pretty happy, he sees a QR code that says, why don't you give us some feedback? He gets his phone out, he scans the QR code. That takes him to his feedback form. Now here it's a full screen one. Let's pretend it's a mobile form. Here we go. High-tech solutions. We could have showed it on a mobile phone. It will work. If you want to come see us afterwards rather than go drinking, then you're more than happy to scan the code and see it goes straight to the form on your mobile device as well. You'll also notice that this is responsive. So the technology, I'm getting under the covers before we go under the covers, but the technology behind this is Bootstrap. So it's the completely responsive web pages. And so the person that's been drinking their beer fills in their information. Puts in his email address. Now we'll skip a lot of this. What beer are you drinking? And so today we're going to be drinking, what beer should we be drinking? Doug?
Let's have a bit of the better, bitter, fitter.
Better, bitter, fitter. Better, fitter, bitter. Very hard to say after you've had some better, fitter, bitter. It was really tasty, a fantastic drop.
Okay.
Now, the other thing that's happened is we've captured the latitude and longitude. And the reason we've done this is because we want to link this feedback to the pub. And there's a couple of ways we could have done that. We could have cast the URL so it was unique to the pub, and that would have been the non-config solution. Here there is a little bit of script on the back of the page, so it will capture that, and then it will pass that through to CRM, where it will match it to the pub.
And of course, normally you'd hide those fields.
Of course.
Just put them there so we can prove to you what's happening.
And so if I submit that, it'll go through and it says submission completed. And then if we go to our pub, if the gods of GPS are with us, then if we look,
you might be a bit...
There we go, got some. And so if we go down here, we've got Mary Stout, etc. So there's previous feedback we've received. If I refresh the lists, then give it a couple of goes, and then we'll just say yes, it would have worked. But it may be that the GPS is not being friendly to us. But the feedback would come in. You'll also notice we've got a sentiment analysis here. So this is also, again, we'll show this under the covers. This is also using the Cortana intelligence, and we'll show how that works in a bit. And so we've caught the feedback from the pub person. It's come in, and usually it will come and go sit on the record. And so we can imagine that from Daily Draft's perspective, if I've got a sales rep that's going to be going out to the pub, so they're going to be going out to the Log Me In, and they want to know, what kind of feedback have we received from the punters? This is information they can take to their client. They can take to the pub and say, look, all these people have been loving your beers. It's been great. If there's feedback saying the beer was good, but the glass had lipstick on it, then they can feed that back and say maybe you need to clean up your dishwashers, and so on and so forth.
And we can see that's flowed through now.
Yeah, good work. There we go. It has flowed through. Fantastic. Not quite real time, but almost. And then, so the other part where this feedback's going to come through is in the product development at Daily Drafts. And that's where Doug can show us how that surfaces.
So has anyone ever tried to brew beer before? Yeah? Yes? Are you an avid home brewer? Okay.
You're going to love this.
Then,
no, everyone else will go, what's malt? You'll love this.
Then I have taken a couple of liberties here, okay? So you will see a few things that don't look quite right. So this is a Power App, right? It's a completely configured app. There's no code cut in the production of this application. And what we've done is we've built an app that can help a brewer formulate a recipe. And so we've loaded a whole lot of data, which is around sort of style guidance. So it gives you things like flavor notes and tasting notes. So we were talking about a better bitter before, a best bitter, my apologies. If we come through the list, we should find an example of that style here. And it brings up all the flavour notes and the aroma, etc. Descriptions about how you should make that beer. And we've got a list of the products that we actually make at Daily Drafts that are part of that sort of style family. And you can see there's only the one, the Better Fitter Bitter. And when we select that, you can see that we're also starting to surface all the recent customer feedback about this particular beer within the brewer's app itself. So they can start to sort of think about customer feedback as they're tailoring the recipe. And we can see Leon's feedback just here. We're also grabbing a bunch of other data. Normally you'd actually pick a yeast rather than key in the attenuation, but things like the batch size and boil time and all these things you need to formulate a beer recipe. And so it's a work in progress, this app, but just to start to show you the types of things you can do with Power Apps. We've got a function to build a grain bill. So we can start to say, let's go and pick a particular grain. For those that don't know, there's a bunch of different grains that you typically put into a beer. Maybe we put 4 kilos of that in. And what it's telling us here is that our target ABV, our target alcohol percentage for this beer, is between 3.8 and 4.6, based on the style we picked on the previous page. And so as we start to adjust the recipe, let's pick something else here. We'll put some caramel in. Maybe we'll just put, let's say, half a kilo in. Oops, wrong one. And you'll see again, it's adjusting real time, a little dial there, okay? We'll talk about that, how that's all made in a minute. So that's basically the consumer-focused experience that we've created through config using the Dynamics 365 stack. So we jump back to the pack.
Yeah, so if we now look at a typical B2B process, so I mentioned before how Daily Drafts is extending their technology through the supply chain. So they're reaching out to the pub and they're monitoring the pub to work out when they're swapping out their kegs. And so in this scenario, we're going to track that keg use using the Windows IoT. In our case, we're going to simulate that because, it's a demo. And real-time data is not necessarily the strongest suit for Windows IoT. Visualization of big data, so we'll basically show with that input what we can show and how we can visualize that within Azure using Power BI. We're going to show how when they swap out the keg, that's going to trigger an event so that flows through to Azure and then flows through to the operation service, what used to be called AX, and will trigger a new reorder automatically within the ERP system. So it's not that the pub has to run out of beer, right? We never have the situation like the song, right, where the pub's no beer. It's just going to be an automated process where the order comes through and it automatically gets created. Similarly, we're going to email the customer to approve the order. So rather than get it automatically approved, in this case, they want us to email them first. And so we're going to send them an email through Office 365 to make sure they approve it before we send out the goods and send out the order and send out the new set of coasters, which of course we'd include.
Okay, so we were originally going to do this a little bit more realistically, but then we had a Wii balance board and a Raspberry Pi, and we were going to simulate a set of scales with a keg sitting on them, and that was a bit too much to carry up from Sydney. So we kind of gave up on that idea and we built a simulator instead. And so this is a 4-tap pub that you can see on the screen right now. And if you look at the rate that data is flowing, you can see every line that appears is a beer being poured. So it's a fair bit of beer that's been drunk in the last few minutes in this pub. And so all that data is pumping into Azure. And what's great about is we're starting to see it in real time here. So we've got this many lines appearing on this page here. And those lines represent basically the weight going up as a new keg's put onto one of the taps, and then going down as it disappears. And we should actually have this number changing in real time. I'm not quite sure why it isn't. Just try refreshing that. But essentially it's a real-time feed, and so anything that you're feeding up into the Azure IoT suite can be a real-time feed on a dashboard in Power BI, which is fantastic. You can use it to monitor things internally within an organization, but also as you start to embed devices in products and you have them pumping data back through the cloud, you can start to display that in real time. And you can see, if you look at this number here, this is the total beer that's been poured through taps in the LogMeIn, and that number's going up in real time. We've also got a feed of all the sentiment data, so we can see the average sentiment versus target for the better, fitter, bitter product line, which is a real mouthful to say, I must say. Okay, so this is handy, right? But we wanted to go that step further, like Leon spoke about before. What we wanted to happen next is to try and streamline the ordering process. So could we take this data and then use it to automatically generate sales orders in the ERP system that's sitting behind, Dynamics 365 for Operations, for the LogMeIn. And so if I jump across into Azure, I'll have to press a button. We've got it set up to happen on a daily refresh, which is not going to be quite quick enough for our purposes here. So I'll just kick off the process any second now. Has anyone played with any of the Azure IoT suite in the room? Azure Logic Apps, Flow, okay. Yeah, a little bit of Flow. Look, I think it's incredibly powerful what you can do just with a bit of config now, compared to how difficult it used to be to achieve these things and how much code was involved. So I'm just going to trigger this process. And what we should see in a minute is an order sitting in the ERP. So let's jump across into Dynamics 365 for Ops. This always happens with the preload, right? They need some little add-in for Google that takes care of keeping all the preloads in. And we can see we've got 39 unconfirmed orders sitting in here. If I take a gamble, no, it hasn't quite happened yet. You can actually watch these things coming through in real time. So you can see the process is actually running in the background here. And we can see where the process is actually at. Did I pick the wrong one? That would make it a little bit more challenging. So we'll get into a little bit later how this is all connected behind the scenes, because there's a whole lot of stuff happening. There's service buses and there's the common data service collecting data, and there's various flows and logic apps that are tying all this together. So we will walk you through the mechanics of how it's pulled together. But if we have a look at this logic app run, you can see what's basically happening here is we're getting all the transactions, all the keg swap out events, and we're going and creating a bunch of sales orders for them, and then we're going to go and add all those lines into the order, and all that's just happening now, okay? So whilst those lines are being added in, what we should, there we go, we're done. And if we click on this, we should see here that the order number created was number 63, just so you can see I'm not telling you a fib. So we'll jump across and refresh this. This is what we call a workspace in Dynamics 365 for Operations.
So this is the ERP side of it now? This is the
ERP side of it. So this is what runs your back office and your supply chain in essence. And if we come down to the bottom, we've got the order sitting here, okay? The other thing that's going to happen, and I'm just going to kick something else off, see if I can multitask. So you'll see the product line sitting here for the 4 taps, and you'll see the quantities that have been suggested for reorder based on what's been consumed recently. So the last thing that happens as part of this process is we don't want to just go and ship goods and then have LogMeIn come back and say, hey, we didn't really want to reorder. We were, shutting down for 2 weeks for renovations and you've just sent us a bunch of goods. Sorry, we're not going to pay you for them. So we want to send out an email and let LogMeIn confirm, yeah, I'm happy with that order. And so again, we're using a flow to do that behind the scenes. And if we find, now I've got so many browsers open. What have we got here? Okay. So we'll just do this again quickly.
D365? Oh, I might be on that one.
No, it's okay. And we'll see these emails coming in through here. And we've been having a bit of trouble with the spam filter on Gmail, not liking the .onmicrosoft.com account. So we flicked one through a little bit earlier from a different account. And you'll see what happens is now we get an option to basically say, yep, let's approve that order, or let's reject it, or let's request a change to it. Now what's attached to this is a copy of the order itself. And so what we can do is, if I'm the LogMeIn manager, I can actually come in and change the suggested quantities in this spreadsheet, reattach it to a reply to the email, and at the same time hit the change button. And so that basically flags to the workflow running behind the scenes to go and look out for another email that's going to have that update in it, and then load that update before you go and confirm the order, okay? So that's kind of how it all connects together. Rightio.
No worries. So now you've seen the processes and sort of how it sort of surfaces. Now we'll dig under and show how these are all set up. And we'll show you just how little code there is. Gartner talks about the citizen developer and how basically, and Microsoft do the same thing, right? Microsoft these days guide a lot of their business productivity tools to be aimed at a power user, someone who has enough smarts to be able to configure stuff, but not necessarily enough to develop. And so we're seeing this trend that more and more people are getting involved in the configuration of software, and the developers have still got a place, right? I'm at a developer conference, I'm not stupid, right? But so developers have still got a place in the process. But certainly with products like Dynamics CRM, products like the operation services, we're seeing we can do an awful lot with config before we need to do the finessing with the development side. And so the first one I'll look under the covers is what I showed at the first. So we've got the scanning the QR code on the glass. In this case, we didn't do it on the glass. We thought coasters would be a lot better. And I had real trouble transferring a QR code onto a glass, which is why we use the coasters in the end. So scanning a QR code on the coaster, and then providing feedback at the pub. And so how to create QR codes is very simple. You can go on Google and you can find a QR code generator. So the actual generation of this code is very easy. And this one is linked to the URL. The page it goes to is a CRM portals page. To provision those for Dynamics CRM, then if we go to Dynamics 365, basically the portals come out through the App Store, and it uses Dynamics CRM as the CMS effectively. So all the pages are defined within the database of Dynamics CRM. And if you want to make any changes, you can make some changes through the portal, through through the editing overlay that appears there, which we'll see in a bit. But you can also make them in the back end. She's winding her gears a bit. Otherwise we'll go to one we prepared earlier. Try any of them. Maybe try a different browser. Oh, we go. No, this one's up. Here we go. Here's the one we prepared earlier. So this is the Dynamics 365 admin page. I've gone through to the administration area for Dynamics 365. And if I go to applications, then we can see there's a number of applications available to us which are provided by Microsoft. And so these are things like the field service add-on. And one of the ones here is Daily Draft. So this is the portal add-on. And literally, if this was a new site where I hadn't enabled this already, there'd be an enable button here. I'd click it, then I'd go to the manage and I'd provide the details. And the details are things like, what kind of portal do you want? Do you want a customer portal? Do you want a partner portal? So on and so forth. And it goes through and does that. So in terms of adding these applications to your Dynamics 365 environment, it's very, very simple. Not sure what's happening there. But yeah, so no code involved, and it spins up the entire portal for you. There's an entire sample portal that gets spun up. And so to interact with that, and so if we want to make changes to it, then we do that within CRM. And so if I go to CRM, he says, jumping about professionally. Here we go. There we go, this will do nicely. No, that won't do nicely.
That's the right window.
Don't do that. You know where we're going? We're not filming this, are we? No, we could edit out. Thank you. Got there. Okay. So to edit these pages, these portal forms, it's actually a pretty simple process. So if I go to the customizations area of the product, customize the system. Then we get full access to the back-end entities of CRM. Now in this case, the one I've used for the sake of expediency was the lead entity. So if I go down, browse all the way down to the lead entity, basically because the portal already had a form linked to the lead entity providing information. And so if I go to the forms here, and there's one here called the Contact Us Personal Web Form. This is the form that we saw before when we entered our information and the feedback. So this is the form that the person in the pub, when he went his QR code, basically this is the form that he comes to. But we can adjust this however we like, because it's just a form in CRM. So if we've got any kind of knowledge of Dynamics CRM, or all the names it has today, then we can adjust this form. So it's got first name, last name, email, phone number, address, which beer are you drinking. We can add new fields to this, we can grab these, we can move them around, do whatever we like. And when we're finished changing this, all we have to do is go save and publish, and that then surfaces on our portal. And it's that easy to change these pages. They're automatically linked from CRM to CRM portals, so we don't have to write any of the code to link the form, right? That's all done for us, it's all provisioned as part of the app service. So it's very easy to adjust these forms and to create new forms.
And so essentially just with CRM skills, Leon, you're creating a responsive client-facing web application.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's all it is. To connect it, again, it's pure config. So if I go to the portals area and go to the web forms, then to set these up, there's a customer case satisfaction survey. So here's one that's already in the system that we can just look at. Again, to link basically the CRM form that we've created in CRM to the portal, it's just, again, we just set the information here and we go for it. Actually, the one we'd want would be entity forms. So if I go to entity forms, there'll be the contact us. There it is. And so this is actually the one. This is the one which connects our form, so the form name, which is the one we've just looked at, and it pumps it up to the website, customer self-service. So again, this is just us creating records in CRM. This is us drag and dropping fields. If anyone's got any kind of power application knowledge of CRM, they can now create a fully fledged portal with forms and do everything they need to do. So that information comes into CRM, and then it goes through to
Flow. So now the sentiment analysis. So the sentiment analysis is being done using cognitive services. So basically Azure's, Microsoft's Intelligent Systems API, I guess, is the easiest way to look at it. And we could easily write a plugin for CRM, cut some .NET code that, as records were created, called out to cognitive services, to text analytics, and got the sentiment analysis results back. but that requires cutting code. It's the same with attaching a venue to a record based on basically geolocating it. Again, could all be done with a plugin, but requires code to do that. So to avoid code, what we've effectively done is used Flow. And Flow is really basically a service for bringing together a series of cloud applications, and not necessarily exclusively Microsoft cloud applications. So you can certainly integrate things like Salesforce as well into these processes. There are connectors out to a whole raft of different applications. And if we jump across to Flow, which should be sitting here, you'll see I've got a couple of flows that I've configured. So Flow comes, actually, it's the wrong, so you can have multiple Flow environments. And Flow comes as part of the licensing of Dynamics 365. And essentially, if we pick up the Analyze Sentiment and Locate Feedback flow, what you'll see in here is really just a very simple cloud workflow. So what we're doing is we're saying when a record is created in Dynamics 365, and so this Dynamics 365 connector already exists within Flow. So when this record is created, there's another basically connector into the sentiment analysis within Flow. And you'll see this load in a minute, but we're basically saying pass the description field from the lead entity, which is what we use to capture the feedback, pass it into the sentiment analysis web service, and then get the result back from that. And when we get that result back, what we want to do is go and update a record. And the record we're updating is the lead record. And so that's how we're flagging it as having a sentiment that's either positive, negative, or neutral based on the text. Now, the way that the text analytics work, the way they detect sentiment is they just give you a value between 0 and 1, where 1 is really positive and 0 is really negative. And so you have to kind of break it up into tiers. So that's what we did. And so you'll see we've put some conditions in here. And those conditions are basically if the score from the text analytics is greater than or equal to 0.7, then we're saying it's positive. So go and set the record to positive. Now, if it's not, then we have to embed another condition within this condition. And the page is just being a bit slow here. Let's see if we can get that to load. But what you'll see here is basically it now checks if it's less than 0 or equal to 0.4, in which case it's negative, and if it's neither of those things, then it's neutral. Okay? And so in addition to that, we want to do that geolocate thing. We want to work out which venue it's near. So we've just adopted an approach here of saying if it's within 1/100th either side of a venue for the latitude and the same for the longitude, then we'll attach it to the first venue record that's retrieved from Dynamics 365. And so to do that, Flow doesn't actually naturally have mathematical expressions built into it. And so we kind of have to trick it. And you can see here, let's just try something different for a second. So there's a whole lot of JavaScript happening on these pages, and sometimes when they're left open for a period of time, I have noticed they can get a little bit unresponsive. So if we bring this up again, what you'll see here is these are called compose functions, and there's a little bit of, I guess, almost what looks like code in here. So Flow's built on top of something called Azure Logic Apps, which was really, I guess, Microsoft's attempt to reinvent BizTalk as an iPaaS solution, like a MuleSoft or a Dell Boomi or one of those types of solutions. So because it's built on top of Logic Apps, and Logic Apps has a whole lot more power, you can actually use some of the Logic Apps functionality within Flow. It's not really documented anywhere, but you can actually do it. And so I've used a Logic Apps expression here, which is just a subtraction function to take the longitude value out of the original feedback and then basically subtract 0.01 from it. Similarly, I'm adding 0.01 to it in the compose function below. And then what I do, and we can see that here, you can see the add function. The only trick with this is once you create these, because Flow's not really designed to do this, it locks the field and you can't edit it again. So if you wanted to change it, you've actually got to delete it and recreate that line in the workflow, which is fine because you can drag these about on the screen. And what you'll see that I then basically do is I try to get the nearest venue. I can actually hear the fan whirring away, so this computer's obviously struggling a little bit with this page at the moment. So Flow's actually a really impressively powerful tool. I think it's got a way to go in terms of having all the functionality that you'd be looking for. You know, in the time that we've spent using it so far, we've often found you're trying to work out a workaround that allows you to do what you're looking to do with Flow, which you can generally do, because you can always basically write a little bit of code in a Azure function that you call from Flow to get around certain things. But it is very, very impressive in terms of how simple it's starting to make some of these cloud style of workflow. Oops.
So if it's built on Logic Apps, does that imply that Logic Apps has got more of the functionality and some of the things that Flow doesn't have?
Yeah.
Why would you use Flow and not Logic Apps?
So the easiest way to think about why you would pick up Flow over Logic Apps is to think about who should use it and the scenarios they should use it in. And essentially, Flow is for something that you're relatively comfortable configuring in a production environment, whereas Logic Apps is something where you can actually have the definition of a Logic app in Visual Studio. It can be in source control, and it can follow all of the DevOps processes that a development team's probably following. So if you want what you're building to follow through a DevOps process, then you would use Logic Apps. Also, there are certain things you just can't get around, certain sort of quirks to the way Flow works and the way Logic Apps works that you can't get around in the Visual Designer. So even though Logic Apps also has a Visual Designer, you can look at the code or the XML definition, the JSON definition of the Logic app that sits behind that. Sometimes you do actually have to go and edit that to get around some of the quirks in the Visual Designer. Okay, so I was just going to quickly show you one last thing in this flow, which is how we basically query something using that information, those min and max sort of latitude and longitude values. Because this really sits at the heart of what you want to do with these cloud workflows. You want them to operate on certain records, so you've got to be able to query out the data you're looking for. So if we jump back into this analyze sentiment, fingers crossed this time.
And as a caveat, there was a small part of code on the CRM portal page to surface those longitude, latitude values from the browser into those two fields.
Yes.
And basically we copy-pasted that from, what was it, the Google site, wasn't it?
No, I wrote it.
Oh, you wrote it in there. Okay, so yeah, you wrote some code. So yeah, we need a little bit of code there to get those values in there. So there's sometimes you do need a little bit of code. As I say, if it's that you're completely adverse to writing code for no good reason, then you could recast the QR code to be unique to that pub, and then it would be basically up to Daily Drafts and the printing agency.
And so you can see that code here. It's just a tiny little bit of JavaScript. It's just using HTML5 to go out and grab the location and write it back to those two fields, right? Pretty simple stuff. Any web developer will be able to do that in a heartbeat. Okay, so we've got this query to Dynamics 365, which is querying the accounts, which is where we store all the venues. So that's where LogMeIn is stored as an account. And you'll see we've got some advanced settings that we can open up here. And one of them is a filter query. So generally these add-ins, they use OData as the format to go and retrieve data from the applications they're trying to talk to. Certainly with the Microsoft apps, that's what they use, because most of the APIs in Dynamics 365 and a lot of modern Microsoft stuff are all sort of OData compliant APIs. And so all we do is use an OData filter expression, which is just, the longitude is greater than the minimum from. If I click in this field, and it is being absolutely terrible right now. Yeah, it's not going to load. So what would pop up is a list of all the outputs from the other elements of this workflow in Flow, and it'll let me select them. So the way these various values, which are the min, max, latitude, and longitude have appeared in here, is just by picking them from the list that pops up in this field when I'm editing the field. So I think we might give up on trying to do that because it's just not working. Are there any sort of questions about the flow, just quickly, before we move on? No? Okay, cool.
Question? You have a question, George?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were just trying to do something with the minimum available tool set and absolutely pure config. I'm sure there is a smarter way to do that from a proximity search perspective. But basically we're trying to... Sorry. Yeah, I'm sure there's other services, but basically if it's not a service that Flow's naturally connected to, then there is a bit of code involved in getting Flow to be able to talk to that service. And that's largely around, you effectively have to have a Swagger definition that explains the makeup of that service so that Flow can communicate with it and give you the content back in a format that's consumable in the Flow designer. But yeah, absolutely, I'm sure there's a much smarter way to do that. Okay, so that's how we're doing the sentiment analysis. So once we've done the sentiment analysis, the next thing we were doing is we were actually dealing with the reorder process. And so the reorder is all implemented in a set of Azure Logic Apps. Because Flow there are just some quirks to the way things work that you can't overcome in Flow, particularly with the Dynamics 365 for Operations connector, which is a pretty quirky thing at the moment. It's actually in preview. So if we have a look at one of these flows, right? So this is Logic Apps. This is the Logic App design experience. And it's quite similar when you open up the designer to a flow, which you'll see in a second. What you'll see straight away is the save and discard buttons have become enabled. And that's because even just loading this flow, it's actually changing the definition of the flow. And that's what I mean by some quirks in the visual designer. And so to get around that, what we've actually had to do is design the whole flow, the whole Logic App visually, but then deal with a few quirks in the code editor that sits here, okay? And it's actually pretty easy to, these things looks like a whole lot of gobbledygook on the screen, but it's actually relatively easy to work with. So, how are we doing the replenishment process? Let me jump out of this and we'll go into a different Logic App, just a second. Okay. Actually, what we'll do is we'll start with the IoT side of things. So Azure IoT Suite gives you a few things. First, it gives you IoT Hub. And what that basically lets you do is take a whole bunch of devices, register them within IoT Hub, and then consume the data from them up into the cloud. So, this thing here is pushing data, and that is these, thousands of messages that are appearing here within the Logic App. And, if I was to reopen this, you would see, within the IoT Hub. And if I was to reopen it, you would see this message count increase. And we can actually jump in and see the devices that are sitting here, and probably some testing ones and things as well. But you should see the 4 devices that we're mainly playing with, which are these tasting room 1 to 4 devices, okay? The 4 taps in the pub. Now, once we've got that data flying in, we need to do something with it. We need to do some analysis. So, to do that, we're using Stream Analytics. Okay? So Azure Stream Analytics can take the real-time feed from the IoT Hub, and then it can use what looks like a SQL-style language to effectively query that data. So we've got 2 here, 2 jobs that are running. The first is just a beer consumption job, right? All this is doing is collecting the data and passing it through so that it's available to visualize within Power BI. Every Stream Analytics job has an input, it's got an output, and it's got a query. And you can see the data that's been flowing through this, okay? And our input here is dealt with in the query. So all we're basically doing is saying we want to feed it to the output and that we want to timestamp it by a field that's supplied in the record, which is the entry time. It's coming from the device itself as it publishes into the cloud. Okay, the last thing here is the output. And so when we create these outputs, you get to decide where they go. And so one of the options is Power BI, and that's where this particular output is going at the moment. And so you can see, I don't know if it says the word Power BI here, but basically, when you create an output that's connected to Power BI, it lets you pick a workspace and a data set name, and after that's done, it appears in here, in this workspace, and you can create if I jump across, you'll see under data sets, I've now got a brewery data set. And so I can start creating reports off that data set, right? So, for example, this beer consumption report. And then once I've done that, I can pin the various visualizations that sit in this report to a dashboard. And it is just taking a little while to load. But all I've done effectively is pin that to the dashboard, which has allowed me to view the real-time stream on a dashboard. So that's what's happening there. What's a little bit more interesting, I think, is the way we do the detecting that a keg's finished, right? Sure, you could do this in code on the device itself, in the way and have it actually send to the cloud like a keg change event. But just to show you what you can do with these queries, we've got a query that's basically looking at a window. And so it says, I've got a window of 20 seconds, for example. And then in that 20 seconds, I check if the weight's suddenly gone from really low to really high, from light to heavy. And if I detect that in a 20-second window, that's probably evidence that someone's put a new keg on. And then it moves along to the next 20-second window. Now, we don't want to detect it twice, so we use what's called a tumbling window, which basically means it moves across a whole 20 seconds rather than sliding across as a window of time, okay? And so that's all defined in the query here. It's pretty simple to do. All we're really saying is, basically, if something happens within a 20-second tumbling window where, and you'll see the expression here, the maximum weight minus the minimum weight in that window is greater than 40 kilos. That's all we're looking for. When that happens, we're sending it to a keg consumption output. That output, if we have a look at it, hopefully it will show it to us, that output is actually Azure Service Bus. So it's actually pushing a message onto a message queue effectively. You can see the details of the service bus and the queue name here. And so what we're then doing with that queue is we're picking up those events in a logic app. And that's what this beer consumption logic app does. If we have a look at the designer, you'll basically see it's saying, when I receive a message on the queue, here. Now, we did have to write a tiny, tiny little bit of code in an Azure function. There's a bit of a bug in the way Azure Service Bus works with JSON formatted messages. It actually puts an XML header on them, and you've got to strip that out. Otherwise, logic apps can't work with data. So we do that, and then we parse the output because we know the format that we're expecting on the message. So we just basically define the format of the message, which is going to have a device ID, a minimum weight, and a maximum weight, right? 3 fields, we define what type they are. And so once we've done that, now Logic Apps can work with the data. Now Logic Apps actually knows, once it's parsed that output, that here are the fields. And I mentioned before that it's as simple as just basically select and fill. So it is, literally. You can grab a field and pop it into something on this Logic App, yeah? And you can also write expressions that use these fields, right? And there's a whole reference of string functions and mathematical functions, etc., that we can perform within a Logic App, as well as the ability to do things like create arrays and all kinds of useful stuff that you need to do in more complex workflows, which you can't do in Flow at this stage. And then we complete the message in the queue. As simple as that. And you can see, all the instances of it running here. Now, the one thing I brushed over there is this create a new record. What we're doing here is creating records in the Common Data Service. Has anyone heard of the Common Data Service? Yep, a couple of people. So the Common Data Service is basically a configurable, cloud-based, elastic scale database. It's part of Power Apps. The idea is, rather than having to go and write code to create a database that's running on Azure SQL or Azure Document DB or something like that, all that is abstracted, and you effectively work in a pretty simple UI. If we jump into Power Apps, which is where you actually access the Common Data Service, it's only accessible through this web page. You can interact with it through Excel if you want to get data out or in. There's connectors in Flow and Logic Apps, and there is a in preview for US instances only at the moment, unfortunately, a Power BI connector for the Common Data Service. And so for anyone that's sort of done a lot of development in the past, this is basically an operational data store. The idea is as things flow between different apps in the cloud, to get any real-time consolidated sense of the state of, your operations, the easiest thing is to bring it into a common database that you report out of. It also means, I guess where this is a bit different to a typical ODS, is that Microsoft are predefining a series of entities. So they've got a whole lot of things like purchase orders and contact records and accounts, etc., all predefined. And one of the kind of things you have to accept when you create an instance of the Common Data Service is that Microsoft will not mine the data, but they'll mine the structure of your database, because they're using that data to work out how they should evolve the standard structure that comes out of the box, based on what customers tend to be doing with the database en masse. So this is the Common Data Service. It's just a whole lot of entities. You can have pick lists, drop-downs effectively. And one of the things we've added in here was a keg consumption entity, which is this one here. Creating these entities is as simple as new entity. Adding fields is as simple as clicking new field, putting the field details in, and selecting the type of the field. So it's a pretty straightforward process. There's not a huge amount you can do. And you can define what the key is, and you can define relationships this might have to other entities in the database, right? We can see some data that's sitting in here. And so this is where we're pushing all that keg consumption data. And later on, we're using on-created events coming out of the Common Data Service to go and push them into other things using a Logic App. So it's as simple as that. And so that Logic App that is doing that, well, it's actually two, because we've got to create the header. Then we use another Logic App that the parent passes data through to create the lines. I won't go into the details of why we need to do it that way, but that's essentially what we're doing. And we're using the Common Data Service to do a whole bunch of other things. So we've got a table of all the venues and the devices, and we're using that to configure what product lines we're running on particular taps in a venue at a given point in time, which is how we know what to reorder when a particular tap, a keg attached to a particular tap is empty. And so that is this create replenishment workflow that we have sitting here, which will pop up any second. Yeah, and so we're getting all the devices, all the taps. We're going and grabbing all the venue records. We're getting a list of all the consumption. And then we're doing a bit of manipulation of that data to get the right things in the right place to be able to create the records that we ultimately want to create. And we're writing those header records through to ops. And then we're calling a sub-workflow to go and create the lines. Okay? And so that's, in essence, what we're doing with this to deal with how we do consumption. And I guess once we've done all the consumption, we're starting to build out some visualizations in Power BI so we can monitor all of this. And I spoke about how the real-time data, well, that just becomes a data set in Power BI, and we can work with it within Power BI. But we've also got operations data, and we've got the lead data with the sentiment attached to it. And so we're using the desktop version of Power BI. Has anyone used Power BI in the past? Yeah, quite a few people. Has anyone used the desktop Power BI designer? Yep, cool. Okay, so really simple, right? This is how we got the sentiment analysis in here for the Better Fitter Bitter product line. We've pulled in a whole lot of things. We've pulled in feedback, products. We've pulled in some sentiment data. Let's just kill that. That's fine. And we've also started to do things like pull in sales order history and demand forecasts, and that gets really rich. We can start to do a huge amount of stuff with it. Now, I didn't have time to build it all for this data set, and we didn't have enough historical data, but you can start to build out things like this, which do quite meaningful analysis of your sales versus forecast data, for example. And so here we've got a simple example where we're looking at our forecast accuracy plotted in red. We can see we've got a real forecast accuracy issue with a couple of product lines. We're also starting to look at sales versus forecast. Are we on target? But we can drill down into various product lines and understand, hey, maybe a specific line isn't on target. And we're also looking at, service levels for anyone that's worked in a supply chain space. You just set service levels to determine whether you're going to keep, what sort of risk you're willing to tolerate of a stock out, in essence, yeah? And so we're using this to model those service levels and also some alternative service levels and say, well, what would be the impact on the carrying cost of inventory if we were to change that? So once we start to get all this data into Dynamics 365, within Power BI, we can start to do some really interesting analysis of that data. Okay.
Doug, we've got about 5 minutes left. Is it worth going through the Power App and showing some of the config behind that?
Absolutely. Okay, so the last thing that we built is this Power App. This is really interesting. This is the first time I've used Power Apps in in anger, I guess is the term. Now I'm just going to hit the edit button here.
Start out angry, or is that the end?
That's right.
There were some angry moments. So Power Apps is, I guess, it's the closest thing in a world of cloud today from the Microsoft perspective to what Microsoft Access was. It's not everything that Access was, because Access was a huge number of things, but when you start to pull all of these things together, like the Common Data Service and Flow and Power Apps and Power BI, you're starting to get that much more powerful end user or citizen, as Gartner have coined it, integrator, developer type of tool set. The way this works, all the data that's sitting behind this, apart from the feedback that popped in before, is coming out of the Common Data Service. So we loaded up a whole lot of beer styles, and we loaded up grains and all the related data, okay? Just using Excel to push them into some entities that we defined in the Common Data Service. And once you do that, you just connect Power Apps to those entities in the Common Data Service. And so you can see that we've got a bunch of things here, right? So grain and beer style and products and a few different things. And let's say we wanted to surface some of this information. So we added a lookup here, and you'll see if we jump across to advanced, there's a whole lot of properties for this lookup. And so the first thing is it's got some items that show. So one of those data sources was beer style. So what we basically do is say, well, I want to show a list of items from the beer style table in the Common Data Service. I've already added that in as a data set. So let's go and pick beer style. Oops, it's getting late in the day. CRM? Yeah, you could. You can absolutely use CRM. Now, why would you use the Common Data Service instead? I think right now CRM is a more proven way to do it, but the integration performance, the scalability of this Common Data Service is just so much better than CRM. And we actually noticed it even here. Being able to pull a bunch of data out of the Common Data Service was pretty easy in the Power App. The one thing you'll see that can take a while to load on this Power App is actually the feedback from CRM. It's significantly slower. So I'm picking beer style, and you'll see it gives you lots of hints as you go through, right? And once you've got beer style in here, we need to pick a field from the beer style data set that we want to show, and so we're showing the style field. And so once we do that, we can basically put a whole lot of other things on this screen that are related to that. So we've got the selected style here, and then the flavor field on the selected style. And so that's how we're putting all the related data onto this form. There's one little trick. You'll see there's some on-select and on-change events, and they have this little term here called collect. So one of the key concepts in Power Apps is that as you move around, to collect the state of what you're doing in the application so you can reuse it in other controls, use what's called a collection. And it's just an in-memory table within the Power App in essence. And I'm specifically using the clear collect function because I want to wipe it every time and only keep one record in this particular instance. And so I can see the collections I've created here. And actually, what we need to do is just hit the run button for a second. And we'll just pick a style. Yep. And you'll see there's nothing here, right? Because we don't make any beers in that style. But now that I've done that, we'll find, this is basically live debugging a Power App. You find the collection sitting in the background now has a record in it. So what that collect function has done is it's copied the selected record into an in-memory instance of that record so that we know what is selected and can reuse it throughout the rest of the app. The other thing we've done is use some navigate properties. So here we've got a navigate property that says, hey, when I click this, go to the grain screen, which is the next one here. These bars, so there's no control to do this. This is just a bunch of shapes drawn on the screen. And then what you'll see here is there's some really nasty looking formula way down here for the X location, which basically works out the X location based on the style's minimum and maximum quantities, dividing that by subtracting the minimum from the maximum, dividing that into the width of this in pixels, and yeah, it's working out how many pixels along to move it. It's a return to Commodore 64 and BASIC in essence.
But it can be done
but it can,
with configuration.
It can be done without any code, if you call this not cutting code. Yeah.
Yes, we do.
It's probably a little bit borderline. And then there's a whole lot of other types of controls, right? So you'll see here, we've effectively got a collection, what we call if I can manage to click on it. Yeah, okay. I haven't quite got it. We've got a gallery. And galleries collect items, right? And so what we're basically doing is as we press the add button, it's popping something into the gallery. And if you were to click the X button, it's removing it from the gallery. And we've got a couple of magical hidden fields somewhere here too, which we use to calculate the ABV. So you'll see the ABV, this is a formula used by brewers in essence. And it basically takes an original gravity field and a final gravity field, does a whole lot of magical stuff. They're actually fields that are sitting on here somewhere that I've kind of hidden, but I can find them. Well, we can cheat.
Really well hidden.
If I pick original gravity, it's down the bottom. There we go. And you'll see we've got a bunch of other formulas happening in here as well. So it's really easy to do mathematical expressions, Excel-style expressions on the data that you pop into these Power Apps. And you can connect them to flows so that they can integrate into other services as well. So that's a bit of a snapshot or an overview of, I guess, how this mock brewery scenario came together and what you can kind of do with just config these days in Dynamics 365. Thanks very much. Sorry, 4 minutes too late for the beer.
Too late for the beer. So just click through.
Yeah.
Power Apps, it does require authentication, right? So what's the consumer side?
Yeah.
Have a B2C story?
Yeah, so it's got no B2C story today. So Power Apps is purely for internal use today. What happens is it wipes so all the connectors store some authentication data typically. What it normally does is wipe that as you ship the app into the library for the broader organization. And as people load the app on their device, they're asked to log back into those things. So it would pop up a CRM login, for example, and then it would, so that you...
You're saying like if I'm connected, say, to operations,
Yeah,
the end user must have a login to operations.
yeah, correct, yeah. So you can't use it to bypass, in fact, and I know you can license it separately, but basically users are licensed for Power Apps once they're licensed for the other elements of Dynamics 365. Are there any other questions?
Yes.
Yeah, so Flow and Logic Apps today. In Flow, there's actually some out of the box. It's very early stages. There's a few examples out of the box which are predefined templates in Flow. But over the coming I guess, 12, 18, 24 months, Microsoft are shipping a lot of predefined integration between both operations and the broader Dynamics 365 and the common data service. You know, there used to be a connector between AX and CRM. This is replacing all of that, in essence.
If you haven't seen Flow, it's very much like the old If This Then That site, which used to link sort of social sites together and trigger emails and do that kind of thing. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's been pre-created by the Microsoft team that allows you to connect CRM to the common data model, connect the common data model to the AX systems, etc. And so that's their vision at the moment for passing data to the common data services, it's called now, and over to the ERP side of things.
Yeah.
But as Doug says, the connector's dead. This is a new way of doing things.
Yeah.
Just a quick one. So when you were inserting the records into operations,
Yep.
you get a record first,
Yep.
flow into the device next, usually you had to somehow query or capture the sales order number.
Yeah. Yep, correct. Yeah, so basically the way it works is I actually created the header first. I created one header per venue, and then the sub workflow, I passed the venue, the header number in, or sales order number in. So all the lines were created against that sales order number. Yeah, it's exactly how it worked. Yeah. No, so, yeah, okay. So probably a broader discussion around how operations works in terms of integration these days. So there's what we call data entities. And so those data entities basically, they abstract the underlying data model and the underlying database, and they have all of the kind of validation logic to create all the related records, right? And so they'll do all the checking to make sure that's absolutely a valid sales order number that you're connecting it to. They'll also do a lot of other things. So, for example, I didn't put pricing in. I didn't put default shipping warehouses or sites or any of that kind of content in. The data entity uses the standard AX defaulting logic or ops defaulting logic to create the record with all those underlying properties. So actually, I think it's a pretty robust way to do it. However, at scale, you wouldn't do it record by record. And I didn't show how you do it at scale today, but at scale, effectively, there's a slightly different API where you package up the files, and it could be so it could be CSV files or Excel files or XML. You determine what you want to do. So you put the headers and the lines into two separate files, and they get put into a zip archive along with a manifest file. The manifest explains to AX how those files map to the underlying data entities. And you can basically send it the whole package, the zip package. And then what happens is asynchronously, it'll try and process up to 20 items at a time and push those into the system. So if you're trying to bring in 100,000 records, you'd never do it the way we did it here today. If you're working with low volumes, that's fine. But you'd use the NQ kind of API, or the connector API as they're calling it, to do large volumes of data. Yeah. Any other questions? Sounds like the party's raving out there.
Yeah, that's right.
Time to have a beverage in the spirit of the session, I think.
Cool, great.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for your time.